Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here with us because we are unpacking a truly fascinating essay by Su-He Feng. It's called Seeing Within from the Outside, and it explores this really fundamental challenge of human existence, the absolute necessity of stepping outside our own environment to truly understand the world and honestly, to understand ourselves. So get ready because the ideas we're about to cover are going to fundamentally shift how you look at your own life. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this with an ancient proverb that perfectly sets up the author's core premise. It goes, "You cannot see the true face of Mount Lu simply because you are within the mountain." Just think about that for a second. When you're standing right in the middle of a dense forest, all you can actually see are the trees directly in front of you, right? You literally can't see the overall shape of the mountain they grow on. Shuifeng uses this beautifully evocative imagery to argue a very simple but profound point. Being on the inside makes the truth incredibly elusive. And that brings us to a pretty massive dilemma. How can you see the truth if you are trapped inside it? If your entire reality, your values, your whole understanding of the world are defined entirely by the walls that surround you, how do you even know those walls are there? That's the central question we are exploring in this explainer today. The difficulty of gaining genuine self-awareness is just immense when we lack any sort of external vantage point.
So, let's start with Section 1, the Mount Lu problem. Trapped on the inside.
To really understand this, let's look at what happens when an entire nation is stuck inside the mountain. The author zooms out to a historical level, pointing back to the late Qing dynasty. A high-ranking official named Li Hongzhang visited the United States. And he arrived in a 19th century America that was filled with soaring skyscrapers, highways buzzing with cars, and modern fashion. Upon returning to China, which was a place where men still wore long robes with queues, where women bound their feet, and where tall buildings simply didn't exist, he was basically rendered speechless. The author notes that without this sudden, totally jarring external perspective, China's isolation at that specific time would have remained completely unrecognized by the very people living inside it. The author then parallels this historical event with a deeply personal one. He contrasts his own life in China with the time he spent in a remote African village called Kaukele. And the contrast here is stark. He observed local Africans living in very humble homes, yet their lives were simple, meticulously clean, free, and just full of joy. Looking back at his modern home from this new external vantage point, he realized the supposedly advanced life he had left behind actually felt excessively burdensome. It was a society where outer polish was merely masking everyday inner struggles. Moving on to Section 2, Reflections on Modern Society. Getting a totally new lens on China. So relocating to North America eventually gave the author a completely new lens to revisit his nation's past. He cites this really intense quote from the famous writer Lu Xun, "China's history is a cannibalistic history." The author uses this powerful statement to argue that the widely celebrated claims of a glorious 5,000-year culture can sometimes mask a much harsher historical reality. He asserts that this history often reflects a systemic repression where people, and honestly even emperors, were completely controlled or enslaved by power dynamics. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Shuifeng balances the heavy critique. He highlights the profound duality of China's legacy. Yes, on one hand, the author views the historical and cultural legacy as messy and restrictive, but on the exact same coin, there is unmatched, unrivaled potential. He points out that the intellect of the Chinese people rivals that of any nation on Earth. So the key takeaway here is his belief that if the people were allowed to freely express their creativity without that repression, this potential would undoubtedly excel on a global scale.
But to reach that potential, one absolutely has to break the bubble of isolation. The essay warns us that isolation blurs the lines between right and wrong. Think about it. If a society remains completely unaware of outside developments in science, philosophy, and sociology, their worldviews become chaotic. True and false, black and white, it all becomes dangerously muddled. And when someone who is completely isolated genuinely believes they're right, well, the author argues they are likely profoundly mistaken.
And the author actually sees this blurring of lines playing out right now in modern social media, specifically through WeChat influencer trends. He observes well-known figures advising millions of people on concepts like overcoming adversity or crossing class boundaries, but he heavily critiques these teachings, noting his deep pessimism about them. He feels that this advice doesn't teach people how to be better humans. Instead, it encourages them to shed their humanity to become ruthless, or as he vividly puts it, to become wolves, ghosts, or monsters in their sheer pursuit of success.
It's a really striking observation on how inward-looking societal pressures can completely distort human nature.
That takes us to Section 3, the cosmic perspective. Time to look beyond Earth.
So we've looked at individuals and we've looked at nations, but now we have to zoom way, way out and ask the obvious question. Are developed nations like the US, Canada, or Japan flawless? Since stepping outside an isolated nation reveals its flaws, does stepping into a developed Western nation mean you finally found the absolute truth? Well, the author's answer is a resounding not at all. He uses this question to bridge his earlier critique into a much broader, sweeping, philosophical view of all humanity.
And this brilliantly illustrates how he maps it all out by presenting different tiers of reality. From the perspective of what he calls the 1,000-year world, even our most modern advanced nations appear disturbingly flawed. But it goes even further than that. If you look down from the highly civilized Elysium world, Earth itself is basically viewed as a chaotic prison filled with monsters and demons. So, next time you're stuck in rush hour traffic, just remember, to the Elysium world, you're basically a cosmic gremlin. It suggests that our entire planet is completely stuck inside its own Mount Lu.
Finally, Section 4, Finding Your Coordinate System, the ultimate reference point. Bringing these massive cosmic concepts down to a practical, everyday level, the author lays down a pretty heavy truth for all of us. The absolute hardest thing in the world is to truly know oneself. Among billions of people globally, he argues that very, very few possess true self-knowledge. Instead, we stubbornly cling to our own correctness and our self-centered beliefs. Why? Because we haven't stepped outside. Actually, scratch that. It's more like we're trying to judge our own exact position while still standing firmly inside the mountain. Let's move to and see how this builds into an actionable philosophy. The author outlines specific steps to gain true clarity. First, you absolutely must step outside your immediate environment. Second, step outside your culture, even your nation or humanity itself, philosophically speaking. And finally, observe from the outside. You essentially have to remove yourself from the equation to see the equation clearly. And that brings us to the core metaphor of the entire essay, the coordinate system of life. Just like in geometry, you literally cannot plot a point without a coordinate system and a point of origin. The author concludes that to truly see oneself, you must establish an external reference point. Without this anchor outside of your immediate reality, we remain completely unawakened. We remain muddled and self-assured but completely blind to reality, existing really no differently than plants or insects that are just reacting to their immediate surroundings.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Take a look at your own life, your own beliefs, and the environment you surround yourself with every single day. Where is the reference point in your coordinate system? Are you evaluating your life from the inside, or have you found a way to step outside your own mountain to finally see the truth? Thank you so much for exploring this with me. Keep questioning, keep stepping outside, and I'll see you in the next explainer.